All right, earlier in the week we had an interesting discussion around here about something called Drag Queen Story Time that happened at the Worcester Public Library last Saturday. This is something that is actually, we talked about this last year as we were reading stories about this happening overseas in Britain. California followed, and there's been some other places locally. This, to my knowledge, is the first time that we've had Drag Queen Story Time in Massachusetts, and it occurred at the Worcester Public Library last Saturday. My thought on this was that, and still is, that it's not a good idea because I don't think that this is the type of presentation that we need to be making to preschool and school-age kids. Henry Butler disagrees. Henry Butler is known as Poise'N Envy, and he's Miss Gay Worcester for 2018, and it was he who presented Drag Queen Storytime last week at the Public Library in Worcester. He joins me on the line from Worcester right now. Henry, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I would like one slight correction. Boston actually does Drag Queen Storytime at this moment as well. They have a regular Drag Queen Storytime. I don't know if officially the dates, but it actually isn't the first time in Massachusetts. However, it is the first time in Worcester.
Okay, gotcha. Well, listen, you presented Drag Queen Storytime at the Worcester Public Library last Saturday. It was well attended. This is for people to understand this properly. This was a voluntary program. This wasn't like it was brought into a school and the kids were forced to sit and watch this. It was a library. Parents voluntarily brought their children, and there were a lot of them. There were parents with some very young children, preschool kids, early age school kids, and they sat intently and watched the presentation. My thought on this is that it's inappropriate because, well, you're a performance artist. I understand that. I get that. But what you do is an adult entertainment form, and it's geared to a more mature audience, and in my opinion, not necessarily suited to young children. Where am I wrong there?
I definitely understand your interpretation of that because historically, drag is a very adult thing. It is something that you do see primarily in adult settings. However, I think a lot of that draws back historically to where the gay bar is historically the only safe space for queer individuals to be and to be queer. But I think that one of my biggest things is sort of like branching out and sort of showing that drag can be an art form that isn't necessarily exclusively for an adult audience. I think back of even Hairspray, the movie, which is like by all accords for children. Like that is a film that you can show your kids. It's a musical, it's fun, it's uplifting, and you do have drag representation there. And it's not necessarily done in a very vulgar way. And going off of that as well, I think that, like, I've done a number of pageants, and in the pageant system that we have in the United States for drag queens, you have to present yourself as if you're running for Miss America. You have to present yourself in a way where anyone can view you, and they can still, like, respect you and still, like, be like, this is somebody that I can actually look up to. And so I think that, like, there's a way to do drag and to change drag and to redefine it where it can be acceptable for different audiences depending on how you are presenting yourself and how you're performing.
Mm. Well, I mean, drag has been a part of the entertainment scene forever. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I can remember drag's not new. Drag's been around. There are places around here in Greater New Bedford that present drag shows. White's in Westport, for example, very well attended. People buy tickets and go and watch drag shows. So it is an accepted form. RuPaul has a television show, his own television show. So it is an accepted form of entertainment that adults partake in and participate in. My problem is that children, I mean, look, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, you have such a short window, such a very small time to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Why do we need to trouble kids with this? Or maybe trouble's the wrong word, but why do they need to know about this at that age?
Well, I don't think the focus is necessarily, because again, when they're looking at me, they're not saying in their heads, like, they're not looking at me in sort of the sexualized way that a lot of commenters have. I think when they're doing it, like, it's just, their minds are young and they don't really have the same prejudices that even I have as an adult. Like, and I like to focus on that because even myself, I have my own prejudices. And I think when you're a kid, you don't really have all of those things. And so, like, for them, like, coming into this story time, it was really just a moment to, like, just have fun. And that's really what it came down to, is really acceptance and self-love. And also I'd like to focus on how, like, there are kids that are transgender, there are kids that are queer at a very young age. And, like, there were trans kids in the audience that really looked up to this because it's so hard for people who are under 21 to really get any exposure into queer culture because it's so closeted within the gay bar, within, like, an adult scene. And I think that, like, if I had had that experience as a kid, I feel like it would have done so much for me. But I grew up on a farm in Hardwick. Like, I didn't have any exposure to anything queer. And so there's definitely, like, all of my education just ended up being through the internet as I got older. And just, I think having an actual personal connection to it can be helpful, even for people who are straight. Because there were a number of kids who I'm assuming, I wouldn't know, but I'm assuming will grow up to be straight.
So you concede, I'm sorry, you concede, though, that there is an agenda here. Now, you feel it's an important agenda and you feel it's a necessary agenda, but there is an agenda. I mean, you're trying to reach out and you're trying to say, hey, look, people need to learn about this. People need to understand and get a better grip on what's going on here, and people need to be exposed to more. So it is, in essence, an agenda, right?
I would say vaguely. I would say more strongly, it's allowing accessibility.
But you're trying to mainstream something that up until now most people have felt should not be in the mainstream. So it's a change. You're trying to bring about acceptance and change of attitudes and acceptance from people to what you believe is has been off, really off bounds or out of base for all of this time. You feel this should be mainstreamed in a way that people can see it and learn to accept it and not be prejudiced by it.
Well, I think that it's reached already a lot of mainstream status. Mm-hmm. I just think in general there tends to be a habit of still cordoning off areas where, like, this is where we're allowed to be gay. And even then, that speaking, like, the focus of the event wasn't necessarily, I don't believe, was being gay. Like, I didn't go into the event with the intent of, like, I am gay and we're going to talk about that. I didn't even disclose my own sexual orientation at all during the discussion of, like, during any of that event. The whole event was focused on just sort of loving yourself at a very base level. And while for me as a drag queen, obviously gender representation is a part of that for me, I didn't want that to be the focal point necessarily of the event. I want the focal point to be of loving yourself regardless of disability, gender, political affiliation, religious affiliation. I wanted it to be very much centralized around that concept. And if that didn't come through, then, that it didn't come through, and that's something that I definitely need to work on upon future events.
Right.
But, like, again, the intent of the event is not for one specific representation. I think that I may represent myself in one certain way, but again, that's sort of like an artistic choice of my own. I think you can read a book to a kid, and it doesn't really matter who's reading it as long as the intent is there.
What were some of the books that were being read? I see a photo of you sitting here reading I Am a Girl. What was that about?
Yeah, so I'll go through the 3 books we read. One of them was about a bunny rabbit who acts very masculine, however identifies as female. I can say that can be interpreted as a transgender bunny rabbit, or it can be read as, like, a tomboy, I would say. And sort of, like, the last line of the book for that one is, we love who we are, basically. It's like, I think it says, being us is awesome. The second book was more, I would say, was definitely more focused on, like, a transgender aspect, 10,000 Dresses, about a very young trans girl who likes dresses and wants to make dresses, and that's really the focus there. And it ends with her and a neighbor making a dress together with mirrors, saying, well, the beauty of this mirror is we can see ourselves in it. And the third book was Mr. Tiger Goes Wild, which is about a tiger who decides he doesn't want to act like the other animals. He wants to go back to how he is, how tigers are supposed to be, and decides to, like, be himself, goes out into the jungle, realizes he's lonely, and returns back into the city to realize that everyone has sort of realized, it's okay to be who you are. That last book, I would say, was definitely the least queer of any of them. I included it because I thought that it was extremely fun, and I thought it would allow for kids who don't, like, it would be more I think it works better for, like, everyone. I think that book definitely is very good for everyone to read because it's not, so it doesn't try in any way to, like, be a queer kids novel, although I think queer kids novels are great as well. But I also think that all three of the novels weren't necessarily written in such a way that nobody can like them. For example, with the 10,000 Dresses one, I asked the audience, like, what other dresses do you think she's thinking of? And I had one little boy that was saying, a dinosaur dress. And I'm like, that's awesome. Maybe there'll be a T-Rex dress. And I think that's, like, awesome. It's sort of like fuse creativity, which I think is a really important thing.
Just for those who might be just tuning in, we're speaking with Henry Butler, who is known on the stage as Poise'N Envy, Miss Gay Worcester 2018, and Henry presented Drag Queen Storytime at the Worcester Public Library last Saturday, and it was very well attended by a lot of folks and their children. And so I asked Henry to talk about it today. I consider myself to be tolerant of other people's lifestyles, and I agree that a person's sexuality is, well, I mean, if you're heterosexual, homosexual, that's determined before your birth. That's not up to you to decide that, right? I mean, that's the way you're born, right? That's the way it is. And drag queens are generally homosexual men, correct? Although not all of them are.
Yeah, I would say generally. I was going to actually have a female assigned at birth drag queen entertainer. They just couldn't attend at that time. But, yeah, no, it is either men or women presenting themselves as the opposite gender.
But the motivation for dragging is generally not sexual, right? I mean, it's more expressive. It's an art form. Right?
Oh, it's expressive. It's definitely not sexual. It's very funny because I do get that question a lot. But if you saw the work that goes into getting into drag, by the time you're there is no interest whatsoever.
But see, a lot of people are confused. A lot of people think that if you are into drag, that you're a transvestite or that you're transgender. And there's a huge difference between what a dragger does as opposed to someone who's a transvestite or somebody who's transgender.
I think that comes down to education. I'm also to blame for this myself. Like, when I was younger, I had no understanding of drag. And so I definitely had those same mindsets. And I think it's very hard because that's sort of one of the lines, like, when it is appropriate to teach that, but also, like, I think there's a way you can talk about a lot of issues, and not just queer issues, even things like racism, things like genocide. You can talk about a lot of mature issues, but it's sort of knowing how to talk about them. Because you can talk to most kids obviously, I wouldn't say you're not going to, like, take your newborn infant and be like, I'm going to teach you about racism. But, like, once there's, like, a base level understanding of, like, communication, I think you can talk about a lot of serious issues as long as you go about it in a way that's appropriate for the age that you're speaking to.
Sure. See, what I'm having a tough time wrapping my brain around here. I can understand if this was a session and we're talking about, oppression based on sexuality, or gender status, or confusion over gender, or whatever, and or even, here in Massachusetts we have the transgender law that wound up back on the ballot right back in November. So I can understand having a discussion about issues where people might feel as though discrimination or is involved, or that you need to be educating folks. But where I get confused here is where drag is more of an art form, and it's entertainment. I don't understand why it's necessary to bring the issue of drag queens before small kids. Because there really isn't an issue here of discrimination or any kind of intimidation or anything. Is there? Am I missing something there?
No, I do think that art in general is a very good conduit for any discussion. And so I think that, like for example, like, civil rights for queer individuals really began because of drag queens at Stonewall. Martha P. Washington was the first person to throw a book at Stonewall. And so I think there is a historically, like, an importance to drag for that. But I also think that it's, like, as an art form, like, when you go to a museum, for example, like, it's just art. It's just there. And, like, nobody really thinks twice about it. But I do think that because of the strong, like, the response on either side, it shows that even though it is just art, there's still people who are like, well, it's not, or, well, it's whatever whatever people say. Yeah.
There's a lot of folks who look at an event like Drag Queen Story Time and consider this a form of indoctrination. Get to the kids while they're young, get them to accept something that is outside of the mainstream, and begin to, accept something that the folks who feel that this is inappropriate might not want their kids to be involved in. Indoctrination, you hear that word often?
Recently, yes. My only response to that is, just don't bring your kids. I never want to force someone's parents to do something that they don't want their kids to do. And so that's really where I leave it. If you don't believe in something, if you don't believe in veganism, you're not going to bring your kid to an event that's, condemning meat factories. And, it's just, there is a certain, you do have your freedom of will as an American to choose to not go to something. And again, if it really all comes down to the fact that I was in drag, then that's fine. That's their own personal opinion, and I can't change that. And I'm not trying to change people. I'm not trying to change everyone's mind, because I know not everyone's minds are going to change.
So let me ask you a question that's kind of personal. I have people in my immediate family who are gay, and I think we all do. I think everybody does, because I think there are probably a lot more gay people than some folks would want to believe. But why is it that gay folks, not all of them, but a lot of gay folks like yourself, you're Henry, you are Miss Gay Worcester for 2018. It almost seems as though you are Henry the gay guy as opposed to, the guy Henry who happens to be gay. You know what I mean? Do you get my point?
I do, yeah. I think definitely when I'm talking about drag, it does come off as Henry the gay guy that focuses everything on being gay, but I do have a ton of varying interests, and even within drag.
Well, I'm sure you do, and that leads to my confusion, because I'm sure you're a very interesting guy. Not that you're not interesting right now, but I'm sure you're a very intelligent guy. You sound like a very intelligent guy, and you probably got a lot but who knows? You may be a nuclear scientist. Who knows? But people look at you and say, "Oh, that's Henry the gay guy," as opposed to that's Henry the guy who happens to be gay. Do I make myself? Do you understand what I mean? And I don't mean to be insulting by that. Not at all. Some people who are gay or who are whatever tend to put that on their sleeve and wear it, as opposed to just this is a part of who I am.
I think that again, it comes down to there's a difference between I think wearing it on your sleeve and when I'm doing drag as an art form. Yes, it is queer art, but you can discuss things that are not queer within that art form. I think about, for example, one of the things I learned through a lot of my studies in college was that you can't talk about gender without talking about race and class and sexuality. Those things all intermingle at a certain level. And so, I can't, if I'm booked for a show and then I realize all of the people booked were white, that brings up into consideration, why didn't they hire other types of entertainers? And so, you can't talk about one thing without bringing up another. And so, I think sometimes people may misconceive it as I'm only talking about this one thing, but there's always a conversation to be had about the other intermingling things that are involved. Right.
But in your everyday life, you want to be known for things that you've accomplished, your life, your education, your whatever. You want to be known for Henry the smart guy, right? Henry the guy that builds bridges, or Henry the guy that builds buildings, and not just simply Henry the gay guy that goes around and does drag. Do you feel as though people are not realizing your full potential if they look at you that way?
I would say people who aren't trying. I think that a lot of people don't necessarily, once they realize, oh, it's the drag queen, oh, it's me who does this, does that, or whatever. Yeah. I think it's more on other people at that end. If you're not taking the time to realize and to actually listen to what I have to say, then you're not going to get more than that surface level. Yeah. And so I think that's more so the issue. Not necessarily that people inherently assume I'm just Henry the gay guy. It's people that's where it stops. It may be something that's very obvious. And even when I'm out of drag, I am a rather feminine man, and like I've always been like that, and so that's sort of always been on the front lines. But if you don't take the time to realize more than somebody, because like if I even like listening to like your podcast in the beginning, like it's a lot about sports, it's a lot about freedom of speech, and that's all cool. And I'm like, well, this is going to be like one thing, but then once you listen, you realize it's not. It's about looking past your first conceived perception about somebody.
Right. So how do you usher people beyond that, their first impression? How do you get people inside to know who you are and accept you for who you are, other than what they think they see when they first meet you?
Well, I think it's all about discussion. I think, like, if you look back at, like, a lot of the discussion within the public library post or even within your own post, I think, like, I try to respond to things with as much calmness as possible, because nobody's going to take me seriously as a drag queen if I just go up there, guns blazing, and start screaming at people. It's not going to look good on my end. It's not. No one's going to listen. And I would much rather go somewhere and, like, if somebody has an issue, I have no issue talking about it. And I think it speaks more about me. And I think even if someone doesn't agree with me at the end of the day, they can at least say, well, they took the time and they weren't disrespectful to me.
We had a big discussion about this on the air not that long ago, and as a matter of fact, somehow or another through Twitter, I wound up talking to a gay movie producer out in Hollywood who she wanted to take me to task on this issue. But something that Senator Lindsey Graham said that really pissed off people in the gay community, and I don't recall what it was, but Rosie O'Donnell came out and other prominent members in the gay community came out and started dropping suggestions that Lindsey Graham was a closeted gay male. And it seems as though that's taboo somehow. I mean, if you are gay and you are closeted and you make a decision on your own that you don't want to come out publicly, that it's your business, that somehow or another you have offended the gay community, and they feel as though they have a right to out you on that. And this person, after a lengthy conversation back and forth, said, you know something, you may have a point there, and this is something that the community needs to discuss within itself, that people have a right to privacy and to come out when and if they choose to.
I agree. I think that every community has their downsides, and I think one of the biggest downsides, and I can agree with the gay community, is that we are very proud and we are very prideful. And I think, not like, I do think there is a certain level where you do have to be respectful. Like, some people don't want to be out. And I think, at least within younger generations, one thing I've realized with going to different groups within the city and, like, meeting with different kids is I definitely think it's more of a different gay generational thing. Because a lot of the younger generations, they make it a point at every single meeting to say, maybe not everyone in this meeting is out. What happens here stays here. So I do think it's changing, but it definitely has been an issue. I know from my own personal experience coming out. So,
How did that happen? How did that come about?
It was like accidentally forced upon me. But again, my parents were my father was very accepting. My mom is very accepting. But it was sort of like I happened to have a boyfriend at the time, and my mom was sent a picture of me and my boyfriend together. And not anything in that range.
Right, yeah, no, just so erase some questions.
Yeah, and so that sort of forced the question out then. And I've had exes that were forced to come out, and it caused a lot of issue in the household just because it mainly with lack of trust. Like my ex-boyfriend's little brother thought that his big brother didn't trust him, and that's why he never told him. And so I think that, like, you need to really respect someone's privacy because it is a journey. Because especially until it's acceptable to a level where people don't really even ask or care, there's still going to be a level of coming out that just has to happen. Or within your own personal opinion happen.
Right. So tell us a little bit about Henry Butler when you're not in drag and you're not doing radio shows talking about drag. What do you do?
I am finishing my degree at Clark University. I'm studying. Well, I know Spanish is a second language. I study comparative literature and cultural studies and communications, where I've done a lot of different things. I grew up in Hardwick. I was a farm boy. I lifted hay bales for a living. and I'm just a very big literature nerd. I love comic books. I love books in general. I always love going through like different series and stuff like that. I'm definitely like a very big nerd, very outside of everything.
So this is something, when you dress up in drag and you perform, this is something that's very much out of character for you, but it allows you to express yourself artistically.
Yes and no. I think that it does allow me to have conversations about different topics. So, like, I will talk about religion and, like, things about that when I'm in drag. I did a performance where I did dress up as Eve, which, again, this was more of an adult audience, but it wasn't a, like, sacrilegious performance. It was by no means one that was supposed to bash religion. I think drag has given me an outlet to talk about, like, different things. Talk about abusive relationships, talk about, like, different topics that are not necessarily gay-specific. And it's allowed me to, like, take from, like, literature and films that I like and create a performance out of that, which I think is really cool.
Henry, I appreciate you taking some time. I know we talked about 10 minutes, and we've been about a half hour. I appreciate you spending some time, and it was actually an enjoyable conversation, and I think I learned some stuff, and hopefully the audience did as well. Appreciate it. Happy holidays to you.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you as well. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thanks. Henry Butler, who is known as Poise'N Envy on stage as a drag queen. Miss Gay Worcester 2018, the drag queen story time at the Worcester Public Library on Saturday. I still think that the type of entertainment that we are talking about should be geared more toward older people and adult people and not young children. But I think we gained some insight into not only dragging, but into Henry and who he is. And I think it's important that we learn that Henry is a human being, right? And not a monster that's out there trying to recruit your children into something. So we may disagree on what is appropriate, not appropriate for small children, but Henry seems like a pretty cool guy, right? Let me get your thoughts on this as we take a quick break, and we'll come right back. 508-996-0500. Stay with us. You're listening to 1420 WBSM.